Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience as we've just waited for everyone to join in the webinar. But now we're ready to get started. I'm Diani Ricotso, Editor-in-Chief of Varsity Newspaper, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. In light of COVID-19, this year we're going to be hosting our conference digitally. Consequent restrictions on gatherings have forced us to embrace the switch to digital. And though it has been very daunting, we're very excited to be moving on with the challenging times and embracing them. Though it was very difficult at first, though it was difficult at first, and with our team spread across the country, we've now managed to keep Varsity afloat during this time. Assisted by Zoom and Google Drive, we've been able to shift our print paper online, and we've continued updating our website with articles. And today we have the first ever installment of our virtual conference. The schedule for tonight starts off with an interview with CapeTalk breakfast show anchor Refilwe Moloto. And then we're going to hear from Farai Mubaiwa, youth empowerment activist and Africa Matters co-founder. And then next we'll have Caroline Peterson, who was previously involved with Varsity Newspaper, as well as the digital platform Her Campus UCT. And she'll be wrapping things up for us. And she's currently the features and lifestyle journalist at Fair Lady. Brad Brinkley is our senior copy editor, and he'll be hosting the webinar this evening. He'll be facilitating the Q&A sessions and then also doing a brief closing message. During Refilwe's interview, as well as Farai and Caroline's addresses, please do engage in the Q&A tab. You can just add the speaker that you'd like to address the question to, and then you guys can also upvote questions if you want other people's questions to get answered. And then lastly, we've done our best to try and ensure that everything runs smoothly for this evening. But if there are any minor technical glitches as we switch over between speakers, please do be kind and patient with us, as this is our first time hosting a webinar. And with that, I'm going to leave you to enjoy the conference tonight. And Brad will now take over to introduce our first speaker and kick off her interview.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Tiani. So for those of you who don't know, I am Brad. You definitely will have seen me if you attended Newsroom for Print Edition. So I just want to cover some things that Tiani may have not covered in Refilwe's introduction. As she said, she's a strategic and economic advisor. With 15 years of financial services experience, Ms. Moloto is also a commentator and thought leader on strategic, economic, and financial market development in Africa. She has spoken in global technical conferences and in the media. She currently anchors the morning show Breakfast with Refilwe Moloto, which airs on the Western Cape's leading talk show radio station, CapeTalk. So that's it for her introduction. So I just want to get straight into the interview. Let me find her. There you are. Hi there. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, how are you doing? Let me just get my video up and running. Hello, hi everybody. How are you this evening? Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So I just want to jump straight in. Could you briefly share some insight into your career journey and how you've navigated the addition of radio alongside your career in finance?
Sure. I arrived at UCT with a great deal of excitement about development and economics. Although I've always had a passion for the arts or some form of media involvement, the priority was to finish my qualifications and move into finance. It was, you know, like anyone else, the preference of our parents. Yeah. And but I also was very impassioned about development and didn't know how quite to find my way towards development economics until much later. I actually didn't complete at UCT. I had a couple of shifts. I moved back to Johannesburg. I finished at Wits, started off at Merrill Lynch in Johannesburg, which is now known as Bank of America, and was fast-tracked on the grad program to join the research team as an economist. And that was a job that was, covering South African economics, but it was at a time which you might not be able to even imagine, but it was at a time when nobody wanted to do any business with any other African country. So Nigeria was a pariah, it was trying to shift over, but at the same time, this funny little tech company called MTN was being sort of exploring Nigerian markets. And as a result, American investors and European investors, who tend to be more excited about Africa than South African investors, needed to understand what was driving the consumption of telephony and consumption trends in general in Nigeria. And you can't do that without economic modeling. And that's begrudgingly, the company allowed me to do some of that coverage. But I suppose a side note of that was that it got me in front of international clients a lot more. And so just at a time when our debt burden was being forgiven under the George W. Bush administration for most highly indebted poor countries and the like, increasingly sub-Saharan Africa was very interesting to me. The US Treasury landed in South Africa and was like, does anyone know anything on Africa? And so I was like, yeah, and they were like, yeah, you're an American company, you're a Merrill Lynch. So anyway, and so I realized I was actually very excited about the growth outlook and very impassioned, and suddenly the development thing started clicking over again. But the exposure to American and European clients made the business realize that actually research was something that I was good at, but actually, and anyone can be taught that, but be savvy with clients and being able to advise them was something that can't really be taught as easily. So I went over to Manhattan and I joined the Merrill Lynch team there. We were an institutional sales team in Europe, Middle East, and Africa, which broadened my understanding of Africa in the context of the Middle East, Latin America, Asia, Central and Eastern Europe, Russia. And we opened the Saudi office while I was there. We started extending Nigerian opportunity. We opened the Turkey office while I was there. The Israel office was always there, but we were a very tight team of about 20 people. We were #1 rated, sort of building out this business. And then the crash happened. And interestingly, it was actually quite, it was a great lesson. But what it did was, as much as you could survive the street, suddenly there wasn't a...
Just to interject for everyone listening, I'm assuming we're talking about the 2007 financial crash.
Yes, the great financial crash. Yes, correct. Sorry, because there's so many. Yes, triggered by subprime and probably exacerbated by some very reckless lending. And you suddenly realize, and if you recall at the time, it was kind of something similar like what we're going through at the moment, insofar as wasn't just one bank, it was a banking system. And then we realized the banking system impacted an entire economy. We realized that was the biggest economy in the world and was actually impacting the globe. And so the interconnectedness of the world meant that we all stood still. And so what people like to call Wall Street blood money, and suddenly there was no money and it wasn't worth the blood. So the dreams about, oh, actually, maybe I'll explore media again and follow my dreams. Most of us were like, either we stick out here and fight, or as a foreigner, I'd actually wouldn't mind just following my dreams. Like, I'll cash out for a little bit. So I started film school while I was there, like night school while I was deciding what to do, and promised myself I'd return to South Africa to be a filmmaker. But before I left the States, I started getting offers from an asset management firm here in Cape Town called Investec Asset Management. And I kept on ignoring it. I'm a struggling artiste now. I don't do banking anymore. Came back, tried to join the production company. And the production company kept on asking me to do finance. And so I was like, well, that's not why I'm here. So I might as well take the money and do it properly with Investec Asset Management. That brought me here. And while I was at Investec Asset Management, I helped develop a group called the Official Institutions Group, who were building out business development specifically for African clientele. And so government savers, sovereign wealth funds, central banks, national pension funds. And there was the development click again. So developmental economics came back where it was investment, but it was particularly for a particular mandate. And that introduced me back to African countries again, from an economic as well as now a finance perspective. Decided to go on my own and create a consulting or an advisory firm called Ambassador Advisory. And in so doing, retain those relationships and because I had those relationships with the official sides of the economy, like public sector, got private sector companies in South Africa would say, well, you seem to understand this country. So I then started doing a segment on CapeTalk on John Matham's show once a week called Business Africa, because it was a natural fit. And then after a while, they said, won't you host Brookfield's Bunny show sometimes when he's on leave? And I said, sure. And then they were like, do you want to do the... Sure. That's where we are. So my interest in Ambassador Advisory continue while we're building out the show. So that's the long road that brought me here.
Okay, well, that's an incredibly interesting journey. So thank you so much. Also, I just want to add to everyone who's watching, if you do have questions, please put them, ask them in the Q&A forum, and we will get to them after the interview. Secondly, what's the biggest challenge that the radio broadcasting industry is facing? And in contrast, like, what are some opportunities that you think young people who aspire to work in the industry should be aware of? So
the biggest challenge is everybody's challenge in publishing or in media in general, which is money. That's structurally as well as now cyclically. So structurally, you found this disruption that is digital. And it's not just a digitization of information from print media, for example, and radio, sort of over the standard airwaves that we know, terrestrial. But you've got the interruption of podcasting and online content. That is the environment, but then you've also got the democratization of media. So not everybody is a publisher, everybody is a broadcaster. So I'm competing or industry incumbents like CapeTalk and other fall in the last couple of months, Associated Media, and most recently a number of publications from Media 24 are facing the same thing. We are not immune to it at Prime Media. So Prime Media label has and you know, we've got Spotify to compete with, we've got podcasts to compete with, and it's quite difficult. And of course, EWN, Eyewitness News, is another one of our, excuse me, and they in particular are facing the struggle that and I think that the big point has to be that you have to whether you want to be publication that's right. This misinformation. So the three structural shifts: it's democratization, and then of course those are the three structural challenges that are facing media. And that means you've got to pay. If you're trying to enter this industry, you've got to have, first of all, it's quite difficult. You have a multiplicity of skills. You don't get to writer you have to be a writer and a cameraman and a digital specialist because budgets have shrunk.
A jack of all trades.
Into detail so that you can stand out. Say again?
I said a jack of all trades, yeah.
Correct, and almost a master of all as well, which is tough. It's an incredibly hard ask actually of people who are new in the industry, but it is an expectation now. I had Anton Harber on the show the other day, who of course is a brilliant professor of journalism, and we were talking about exactly this thing, and I was like, this doesn't seem very fair. it's not as if salaries were very high when you were a specialist, but now you have to be a specialist across a range of things, and the salaries are even smaller. So I think that's quite a challenge, but the opportunity is, if you can upskill yourself in that manner, or at least have some sort of 360-degree perspective on the fact that I have to write, sub, and publish my own work, and also create some kind of content that makes it look sexy as well, so that people want to click on it, and also, you know, be able to attract brands into them. I mean, if you look behind me, I'm not your average Zoomer. I'm not going to show you all of the bestseller books that I may or may not read. Mine are packed away. But if you were in my business and sort of giving information, you would hope that there was a branded bottle of water, a pen that's branded, and hopefully that's your ad revenue one way or another. And then accountability. You know, you've got a question, you've got to clarify everything that you want, and you've got to be so rigorous in your investigation. There's this rhetoric that's coming up around South Africa that media is dead, that the South African media is dead, and that you basically, they feel as though there's mainstream media that's got one political agenda. You only ever see black crooks on the newspaper covers. You never see the white guys. Even if you do, they never go digging into their bins like Marianne Tam did for Daily Maverick against the guys from EFF. And you need to push against that, because it's an important observation. But at the same time, you need to remember that it is the fourth estate that is the reason that we're not under this administration at the moment. Failed by the legislature, failed by the executive, failed by the judiciary. It is actually the media that has brought South Africa where we are today. I'm ready for your next question.
Oh, sorry. I thought you're frozen on my screen, so I thought I was waiting for that. Okay, no, that was actually really interesting, especially the last part about how the media has brought us where we are today. I think I might have some questions on that, but later. So this is quite topical. What challenges did COVID-19 present to your work? And in the production, or like the changes in content or ways of engaging, and how do you think you and your team have overcome them?
Sure. So the first is we had to lock down all in-person interviews, which are not always as personable. We're oral. It's not like a Zoom. I can't transfer my work into a Zoom meeting. And if I want to have a panel discussion, you can have people talking over one another. It can be tricky, but we've worked that pretty well. The second is the fact that the key broadcasting, like the drive shows, breakfast and afternoon drive in particular, and many other shows, have to happen out of the office as much as people should be at home. So you've got this sort of, you're putting people at risk, but we've done it within the parameters of health and the like. But, you know, suddenly my two produce concert booth at the Studio B. And if we were a smaller organization that didn't have a Studio B, we wouldn't be able to social distance our team. So if you're a very lean outfit, for example, if you're a podcaster that podcasts in your garage, that's a big challenge, right? And the other issue, I think, is COVID-19 economy has just made more glaring issues. So ad revenue coming toward traditional media, there is even less, which means we've teammates. As I say, sorry, I wanted to mention before I mentioned the different properties is Prime Media is not been immune to the economic downturn. We just got our Section 189 letters yesterday, indicating that in a process that likely will see a range of retrenchments. And we still have to be rigorous, accountable, get to every story as much as possible with a much leaner team. One of the things that I do always worry about is the loss of local news. And again, that's an ad revenue and I suppose a problem. If everybody's on a 24-hour news cycle on a global scale, you know, what happened in that little small town Eastern Cape is not being covered on an investigative Pauli van Wyk level of detail. It ends up being like a, that last story in the news, like 2 Bengal tigers were born in the zoo today, Whereas actually, if we were trying to track, for example, the corruption in the Eastern Cape, the Herald tries this a lot, right? The Herald in the Eastern Cape, they're actually still very good, and I'm not sure how they still do it, but getting of it now, and our Minister of Health saying, don't worry, we're dealing with the problems, and I talk to him regularly on my show, and the President saying, don't worry, we'll send out and we'll get scooters. More newspapers like the Herald would have indicated to us much earlier that hospitals like Livingston were falling apart, probably long before COVID. We would have been able to expose them with the same vigor, with the same disdain, and with the same detail that we could go after the Guptas. But of course, they become the central point, and that's where media is really at risk. And that's obviously risk always presents an opportunity. Is those small town detailed reporting. Today I was speaking to Ray, I think it's Jones. He's an investigative journalist who helped us crack as a country the case on maladministration with lottery money. And now that's coming up in the portfolio committee meetings just yesterday from Trade and Industry, that, hey, where's actually all the Lotto charity money going? But actually, he's been investigating this since like 2014, 15.
Wow.
And people like him who are critical actually to then you build the stories all the way to the Guptas. Again, you could have picked it up in the Free State. You could have picked with the Ace Mahashule stories. You could have picked it up in the Northwest with the Supra Mahamelo. There's so much that's at a granular level.
That like just like falls through the cracks, obviously.
It does, and we get lazy, and so this is the trouble. I mean, finding I think the revenue model that actually builds that attracts talent and keeps the machinery of media going, whatever medium it is, paper, podcast, radio. Is definitely the big challenge, and that was what we were talking about with Anton as well, which is publications that saw this quite like the New York Times. Somehow you need to find out how to get a pay per model, in other words, a paywall model, and the only way that person pays for stuff is if your insights are differentiated, rigorous, well researched. And that you're not always first, but you're always correct. And that requires a big team. So you almost need like an endowment, almost like a donation to kick off with. And Daily Maverick is playing around with this kind of model at the moment, as Anton was highlighting that day. There's a combination of kind donations, but also somehow they've built a reputation themselves. The Scorpios, the Amapungane, have built a reputation of really brilliant journalism, and hopefully can put up a paywall that is worth paying for. That's what the New York Times has done. But at the moment, like most of the publications that ask for a paywall, it's like, I'll see it when someone tweets it. And that's another problem with the SA media, unfortunately, because now, of course, if I'm not getting paid a lot as a writer and I just need to fill pages or just get clicks for ad revenue, I'll write anything, right? And how often do you see articles that are like a furor against Ntsigi Mazwai on Twitter, and then they just paste a couple of tweets, and it's like, wait, that's not journalism.
I hate posting an article and then it's just like a Twitter feed, and it's just like, why?
And that's happening globally, hey? That's happening globally. One model, sorry if I may, I know we need to go to Q&A, but one model that I think kind of has bucked the trend of being. Usually you have to be first. Usually you're first or you're right. But there was a trend that I picked up. There were 2 publications that happened, and it probably happened about 5 years, one after the other. The National Enquirer, and I don't know why I've now forgotten. What's the big tabloid guys that constantly are in the faces of the Kardashians? I forget the name, but they've now taken over. Was in 90s and 80s, which is my time. No, 90s, 2000s, was always known as this tabloid with outlandish headlines, and that you really never believed. And then over time, they finally got to a point where I don't know how, I don't know if it was a hiring strategy, I don't know if they did that on purpose, but suddenly 10 years later, you would find that they were actually right. Like you'd be like, oh, they broke that story some time back. And then this other Tatler magazine, this digital magazine whose name I can't seem to remember. Excuse my language. I'll try and remember it, but basically they were the ones who broke Michael Jackson's death. I think they broke Prince's death. But in the late 20s, or early 2010s and late 2000s, suddenly they went from being this rag of gossip that was always first with nonsense, but somehow earned the trust. Yeah, so I don't know how you do it, but you can pivot. It's possible.
It's hard because like myself, when I read like one of those publications, I just immediately have like a lot of distrust for tattlers and stuff like that, just because you don't really trust this quality of the journalism. But that is interesting. So thank you. So I just want to head on to the Q&A tab. So the first question is, do you think that your international exposure gave you an upper hand with dealing with both of your roles in the financial sector and the media sector in South Africa?
In finance, absolutely. Oh, sorry, I just heard some noise. In finance, absolutely, without a doubt. You know, you can be raised within finance and study South Africa, and it's a very big market. It's very deep, many analysts, very few stocks. Everybody knows every stock and every CEO. But it's not until you actually realize that Africa is a microcosm of a bigger investment pool, and how it moves according to those. So there was a time when only South Africans invested in South Africa, and now, you know, like I think it's almost, you know, a third of our bonds, if not 2/3 now of our bonds, and a large chunk of our stocks on the stock exchange are owned by foreigners, and they're the marginal investor, which means prices move according to what they buy. And what they buy depends on not what South Africa is, but what South Africa is compared to Brazil, Russia, Turkey, Israel. And so you start to see yourself as a comparable. And I can't imagine, and I do imagine that does make a difference to how I approach journalism. It's very, very similar, by the way, of finance and journalism. I wake up every morning at 3 o'clock in the morning, like I did on Wall Street. And it is my job to voraciously consume information, distill it, and pass it on to you in a way that is relevant to you, informative, and that can be a call to action. And I would just say that in media, I have to do that these days without making you want to slit your wrists. You know, when you get to the office, so it's quite hard actually. The news is difficult. We all know that, you know, if it bleeds, it leads, right? And it's quite, so one of the things that I quite enjoy on my show that I try to differentiate, because there's a hard news show, is I try to soften it quite a bit. And soften it by that I mean is I'm deliberate about finding good news. I'm deliberate about not being the person who knows it all. And by the way, that stood me in brilliant stead with my clients in the US as well. Nobody likes a know-it-all, and the only people who think they know it all are usually the ones that actually know nothing, because they have no scale of understanding of how much there is to know and how impossible it is for you to know all, if that makes sense. So it's quite a myopic perspective to have. And actually candor and vulnerability are, I think, two of my more differentiated traits that have helped me do well, both in finance and in media. Yeah.
Okay. Just quickly, what do you mean by vulnerability? Do you mean like the willingness to accept, like, you know, if you've reported incorrectly on something, or just like imparting your views on something in a way?
So that I reported incorrectly on something is not just vulnerable, it's legally required. I must. So I must own up to that. But no, I mean, so I don't know if I'm the first, like, okay, talk radio, first of all, is a space that's mostly dominated by males. of like 60 years plus and generally white, and usually with conservative views, particularly in the talk radio hubs of Australia, the UK, the US, and South Africa. So I happen to be the first Black female commercial talk show host on leading a breakfast show and solo. And TMZ is the rag I was trying to remember, by the way. Sorry, TMZ. Anyway, so so back to this, and there's something to be said for, okay, it's already a big change. And so one would probably think that, okay, it's a lady now in the morning and she's Black as well, so she's going to come with issues, and you know that like she's got like an agenda, or who knows what people think. But it would possibly, to someone else, it might seem reasonable to come in as hard and as masculine and as clean cut and maybe even as conservative as possible. But when I say vulnerability, well, I mean, I'm very comfortable saying on air, guys, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I was always that way with my clients in finance. They'll call and I would be like, I don't know about that particular Israeli pharmaceutical stock, but I can tell you Aspen Pharma does this, and I think that the generic can do that, but let me get back to you. And being able to say, I don't know, being able to say, I'm afraid, I'm nervous, it's my first day, bear with me. Or today I was saying, I don't know about you guys, but like I've had to send condolences 4 times in the last 7 days to people who are very close to me, like this disease is serious. Like I can give you the facts and figures, but this is what's actually, and it's hard to sit at home and at my uncle's funeral on my laptop alone. And that's what we're all going to experience. And I think if we just remember that we're citizens first and we're human beings first, I mean, I think that's what's always carried me through any part of my career. And so even that scary boss has fears and dreams and nerves about things that sometimes if you just offer the fact that so do I, then they kind of relax immediately. I think it's been what's allowed Cape Talkers to be quite welcoming to me. I think it's part of it.
Okay. And our next question, would you say that producing your shows over this period has been easier than when life was going on as normal?
Wow. Not at all. This is such a fast-moving disease. So we started reporting on COVID-19 on January 21st. That's our first interview. So one of the things that's difficult is that was our interview. That was when we were like, hey, we heard there might be a new strain of this coronavirus, and we spoke to the NICD. And it wasn't until about mid-February that we suddenly realized that, oh snap, China's going down, and then only did it start going to Italy. And one of the things that's difficult about reporting on these things is you kind of want to report on things that people care about, right? I'm just here to help us find answers that we care about. And just nobody cared. Nobody cared for the first 3 months, certainly not before lockdown. So I need to inform you to stay safe, stay informed, think about people other than yourself, you know, and we are repeating ourselves a great deal. So somehow we need to find, because COVID is so all-consuming in the economy, in health and everything, travel, it is affecting everybody, but they're all sick of it. Everybody's sick of talking about it, but I have to keep informing you because it's fast changing. And the facts change, which mean we change the way we approach things. I mean, I think one of the hardest things for us was I had a fight with my producers, or we had a challenging moment where my lead producer, Bruce, where I have to green light every topic that we have on the show. And so they'll pitch to me and I'll be like, nah, don't think so. And he's like, well, there's this Czech Republic scientist that's saying that the Czech Republic made it mandatory to wear masks. And I was like, absolutely not. We went hard with the World Health Organization saying you don't need a mask. And he was like, yeah, but, and I was like, and so did the Western Cape government. And he was like, yeah, but I think it's interesting because Czech Republic has really not had any increases in cases. And that's the only thing they did. They didn't even lock down. And we had a tete-a-tete. And I was just like, dude, my issue is I'm not here. I'm not going to give conflicting views on the show. So if I told people don't wear masks, I'm not going to shift to if I told people don't wear masks, I'm not going to shift. he was like, no, we need to present both sides. And I was like, in fact, as much as media says you should, there are situations where both sides actually isn't an appropriate argument. For example, I don't think that I need to give both sides representation to a freedom fighter and the supremacist trying to kill him. That's a supremacist. That person doesn't need a platform. I'm just going to talk to the freedom fighter. I can gauge what the supremacist wants to say. Huh?
Yeah, and that's like journalistic integrity, I assume, and like your understanding.
And that's what you see, for example. Sorry, yeah, that's what you're seeing with the Fox Newses of the world, right? They're like, well, if we just play devil's advocate, and unfortunately, but like, look where they find themselves. So, so here we are. So anyway, to cut that short, just to say, Bruce, I said, fine, go for it, Bruce. Let's do the interview. And thank God, because within the week, the Western Cape government had done a about turn. And within 2 weeks, the World Health Organization had done an about turn, and we had led with that, right? And suddenly the whole world now accepts, more or less, that masks are necessary. So I think having to deal with changing, having the same rigor, being trusted as a source and not a flip-flop source, I think is quite difficult. But it's also been fun. I mean, we have a segment called Wanderlust Wednesday, and for 3 months in lockdown, we were like, well, we've got a great new travel idea for you. Head over to your computer and sign up to donate blood, and then you can be an essential service so you can leave the house. Like, you got to get creative.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Thank you. So unfortunately, we're not going to get to all of the questions. I'm just going to let you answer one more quickly. Whose question are we going to answer? So this one is from Jeremy Simpson. He says, has the shedding of journalists shifted the focus away from investigative level to a more clickbaity level? How could the economic downturn in South Africa or another global recession affect the quality of media and journalism in general? And I think that kind of ties in with your previous statement about small town news falling through the gaps.
Correct. I mean,
yeah,
and for Jeremy's edification, it kind of already has. I mean, that's why we are where we are with the shutting down of Associated Media's Caxton. I mean, that's largely, you know, I think maybe the magazines is not really searching for the news. That's just, what does anyone have spare in their pocket to buy something nice like a Rooi Rosa on the way home. But yeah, it has affected the news. So again, to the notion of being first is your clickbaity, right? So it actually, the detail doesn't matter. And I mean, with respect to my colleagues, and I have so much respect for Adrian, Basson, and everybody at News 24, but News 24 has had 1 or 2 slip-ups in the last couple of months of misinformation, or at least incorrect information. The Glenda Gray issue, Dr. Glenda Gray, where she was like, I was misquoted, and spent a week, like she got way more attention than it needed because she found herself misquoted. But I still say, why didn't you just ask them to retract? You didn't have to go on a roadshow on the media. But anyway, and I think they got into a little bit trouble because they are such a big house with so many channels, Fin 24, News 24, everything. And they kind of, you'll notice when news comes out, they tend to be up there. They're first, and that's great because I guess they need eyeballs because they need to sell ads. With us at EWN, we've got smaller teams, but we're still trying to give you as detailed a story. And so we will be a little bit later, but then you can still trust that within a day, you've got good info. And then you've got like the Daily Maverick, slightly more financed by whoever their backers are, and the membership. And then you get these wonderful in-depth pieces and from investigative journalists that like can chase a story. I mean, how long has Paulie van Wyk been doing BBS? And it is landing up with people in the docks, right? So
yeah, you don't run out of mileage with those kinds of stories.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much. This has been really interesting, and I wish we had more time to talk with you and engage with you. But unfortunately, we do have to move on to our next speaker. So yeah, I'm not going to get to ask you those other questions, but thank you so much for your time.
Welcome. Thank you guys, and thank you so much for your wonderful questions. They're really cool.
Alrighty, cheers.
That's a wrap.
Okay, so our next speaker is Farai Mubaiwa. She is a partner management at Lead Youth Employment Service. She is the co-founder of the youth-led organization Africa Matters. It empowers young Africans to lead through developing leadership skills, capacity building, and community impact projects. She's a Queen's Young Leader for South Africa for 2017, a TEDx speaker, a One Young World Ambassador, and a King's Principles Global Leadership and Award recipient. In 2018, she was named as one of the top 100 Mandelas of the Future by Media24. She is the Dalai Lama 2019 Fellow, and this year she was rated as one of the top 100 influential South Africans. And cue Farai. Hi there, thanks so much for joining us this evening.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm well, thanks. And yourself?
Good, thank you.
The floor is yours.
Super. All right, so thanks so much. I'm very excited to be here. It has been a long week, and I can imagine that everyone's a bit tired, so I'm gonna try and keep this not as lengthy as possible, and if anyone would want to engage afterwards, I'm more than happy to be contacted so that we can continue conversations. But my name is Farai Mubaiwa, and I'm really passionate about youth empowerment, and particularly the empowerment of young Black women, especially young Black African women. I think we face so many barriers within our society, whether economically or politically or socially. And so because of that need to empower young people, I am now one of the privileged few who gets to do what they love every single day. And what I do is that I work for the Youth Employment Service. We are creating jobs for unemployed youth. In the past year and a half since starting, we've been able to create 38,000 jobs, which is really exciting. I just started there 3 months ago, but I love to claim the accolades of the organization. That's such great work. And then from the Africa Matters perspective, Africa Matters is an organization that I co-founded with a good friend of mine in university. And interestingly enough, we didn't expect it to grow to where it is today. Today, Africa Matters has impacted over 5,000 youth on the ground through our workshops across South Africa, Nigeria, Ethiopia. And then from our social media perspective, we do a lot of educational campaigns where we educate Africans about Africa. We've got a reach of about 30,000 youth. So it's been exciting to see that when you've got a passion for something and you go and do it, you just try something, things can grow significantly. Rianne and I did not imagine that Africa Matters would be where it is today. And it was like I said, a concept that started within university, and one that we've been able to push through, one that's been very adaptable. When young Africans were like, why don't you do workshops? We then ventured into workshops. When others asked, why don't you do webinars? Because we can't physically attend the workshops. We then ventured into webinars. So I think that's been something that's so important in terms of how to be, adaptable or adaptive to different changes that can come, and how to also do what you love. I think one of the saddest parts of our society is that you've got many people who do what they do simply because it's got that financial means, but not exactly doing what they absolutely love. And the unfortunate part of our South African education system is that it highlights jobs that are not for everyone. It highlights that you must be an accountant or you must be a doctor, but there are so many other avenues for people to be able to make an impact. And I'm someone that went the accounting route, and then after having qualified, then thought, but actually, I love working with people, I love empowering people. Why don't I do that full time? To share a lot of my journey with different people, I run a very inconsistent blog called Tips from Millennial Managers. And I just share what are the experiences like of being a young Black woman manager, in often managing people older than you, in being a woman within the NGO space. Lots of people would think that the NGO space is very kumbaya, everyone's there for the right reasons, but it's definitely not that. In fact, having experienced corporate and experiencing NGOs, it's the same sort of people, the same sort of leadership structures, same sort of cappuccino companies, and you have to keep fighting so that you can change the narrative. I think when you're there for the right reasons, you take it upon yourself to say, how do I change the space so that we're truly impacting those we claim we impact? I know that this conference particularly is focusing on tech, and especially the digital technologies, how that has impacted how we work. And I wanted to share a bit about the Africa Matters perspective. So I mentioned a bit earlier on that Africa Matters started with when we were both in university, myself and Rianne, the co-founder. And there we started this organization as a platform that is able to educate people about Africa. And this was triggered by the Je suis Charlie attacks, where the whole world stood in solidarity in January 2015 with what happened in Paris, France. And a day later, over 2,000 people were massacred in Baga, Nigeria, and no one said anything. Africans were still saying Je suis Charlie, but not acknowledging that this very same terror attacks also destroyed our fellow Africans here on the continent. And so our initial concept was very much technology based. It was just using social media to educate masses of Africans. And as we got more demand for more workshops, we then grew into workshops. And last year we realized that we've got such great workshops with such great content, but we're not reaching many Africans because as a team of 10, we can only be in certain places at certain times. And so we then launched into webinars. And recently we upgraded to having Zoom webinars where we can get even more people on board. We can get people sharing their screens. And that's been incredible because instead of only learning about the South African story, which I think is a mistake that a lot of South Africans make, we only care about ourselves. You get to learn about the stories from your fellow Africans in Tunisia. You get to understand what is the innovation like in Rwanda, what exactly is happening in Egypt. And I think these are important conversations because the more we as young Africans can learn from one another, the more we can ensure that our growing youth population can be harnessed for so much good. I think there's so much greatness and good that we can create out of it. But if we're not learning from each other, we won't be able to harness what they call the demographic dividend. So that's been exciting, that technology has been such an enabler in terms of how we can reach each other, but also be able to learn from each other. And now with COVID-19 having just worsened the ability for people to be able to come together and learn in one space, we have really upped our offerings online. So we've said, okay, how can we ensure that if our mandate is to empower young Africans, we can't stop doing that because there's a virus. We need to continue doing that. And so what have we done? We launched what we call Africa Matters Masterclasses, whereby, again, content is brought to you by young Africans from across the continent who are experts in different fields. And then we've also launched a campaign called She is Empowered, which is about how we empower young or adolescent girls and young women, because we do understand that already young women have it difficult in society, but more so because of COVID, where you're just limited in terms of your movement and then your opportunities to learn. So how do we bring the learning to you? How do we pay for data costs? How do we pay for community impact costs? And that's been an exciting project that we could lead within the Africa Matters space. One of the other questions I was also asked to look at was, how does social media play a role in one's activism? And I think that's an awesome question because my partner and I often have this conversation as well. And I think the first thing is that social media can be powerful. I think it really is powerful. We see that with the hashtag Black Lives Matter movement. We see it with the hashtag Me Too movement. I mean, there's so many movements in our own country as well that have been so significant for bringing about change. But social media on its own will not get us the change that we need. I always use the term that we can't just be keyboard warriors. It's not enough to think that you can wake up and tweet hashtag no to gender-based violence, and that's the end of your day. That's the end of your activism. You have to ensure that you are consistent. You have to do something. And that's why I couldn't just sit around and not do something. I had to find myself a career that allows me to do something every minute of every day. And my encouragement to those on social media is, yes, use social media, use it to highlight different issues, but you have to couple it with action. And you have to couple it with saying, this is what I am saying no to, and this is how I am influencing that behavior myself. I think so often you get a lot of social media allies, and I think allies are terrible. And the reason I'll say that is because if you are a social media ally or even an ally in in general, when you want to opt out of a struggle, you can just opt out. You can tweet hashtag fees must fall and then not do anything about it. Or you can tweet hashtag me too and then go and perpetuate the same sort of violence. But when you are an accomplice, you are committed to the cause. It means that if I get caught, you will get caught. It means that when stuff goes wrong, it goes wrong for the both of us, but we are in the struggle together. If you're an accomplice, you won't rest until justice has been achieved. And I think we need more people who identify as accomplices and less people who identify as allies. And the last thing I just wanted to share this evening is that it's so important for us as young people to learn the spirit of collaboration. Too often we want to work in silos. We want to be, the first person who did this. It always bothers me when I hear of young people who are boasting about how they're at the top, and you ask them, okay, who did you bring with you? Oh, no one, it was myself. But where does that get you? It's the worst feeling to be the only Black in the room, trust me. It's the worst feeling to be the only youth in the room. It's the worst feeling to be the only woman in the room. So we must ensure that in everything that we do, we are collaborating with one another. You are so much more powerful, and you've got a critical mass when you have got others that are supporting you, that you are working together. I think Africa Matters would not be where it is today if it was just an initiative that I started on my own. But because one of the first things I did at varsity was to approach others to say, here's an idea. What do you think we can do with it? How do you think we can empower young Africans? And then was able to get the incredible co-founder, Rianne, that we have on board. And that has been so significant for us to be able to achieve what we've achieved so far. So yes, I think just to share, that is just a bit of my journey. Like I said, I don't want to take up too much of anyone's time because it is a Friday, even though there's a lockdown and an alcohol ban, so we can't do much. But I'm hoping that you can just enjoy in your homes and play Monopoly.
Thank you so much for that. And I think that was really interesting. And I really enjoyed your explanation and what you do, educating Africans through African principles of Ubuntu and communitarianism. And I think that's really powerful. I just want to open up the floor to questions. If you want to ask something, you can go ahead and do so in the Q&A tab. We will give you a few moments to type before moving on to our next speaker. Okay, cool. Well, I'm not seeing any questions as of yet. We could always come back to that. But yeah, thank you so much, Farai. This has been really, really interesting. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your... oh, wait, no, here's a question. Okay. Salma Noor says, what has been the biggest challenge in having your voice heard as a young person?
I think that's an awesome question. And so there's so many different ways to answer it. I'd say that the biggest challenge that I think we face at young people is that there are misconceptions about us as a group. The misconception a lot of people have of young people, or you'll hear them use the term millennials, is that we're lazy, we're entitled, the list just continues. And I think that when you've got that misconception about who you are as a young person, it makes it difficult for you to then break out of that space and prove otherwise. And that's been a barrier that I think as young people, our voices aren't often taken very seriously. I'd say the second challenge is that at times when our voices are taken into account, it's taken in a very tokenistic manner. So one of the things which I really struggle with and dislike is when there is a huge event happening, for example, ECOSOC, when the United Nations Economic and Social Council meets, they have a huge event happening. They've got the high level political forum that happens. And then on the side, there's the ECOSOC Youth Forum. So youth come together, we discuss a lot of things, we think we're really important, and we come in blazes and all of that. And then when the higher level discussions take place, there's no consideration of what happened at the youth forum. But there has to be more of an integration of youth voices. I think particularly for our continent, you've got a continent that has got the world's largest youth population. Africa has got over 230 million young people between 15 to 24. In countries like Uganda, 70% of your youth population is under 30 years of age. So if that's the case, then we must ensure that young people's voices are brought to the forefront. Young people have to be able to have a seat at the table. We have to be involved within the negotiating rooms. So my advice to young people is that put yourself out there. Make sure that your voice is heard, and make sure that the voices of those you represent is heard. I can't tell you how many times I have sat in meetings where I am the youngest person. In fact, now at YES, I'm the youngest person on the management committee. And I mean, this is the Youth Employment Service, but I'm the youngest person within the management committee. And my goal is always to ensure that I am empowering others so that that dynamic can change, and also to represent voices of young people when I am there until such a time that the dynamic has changed. So keep pushing forward and keep ensuring that your voice is heard. And to do that, you need to make sure that you read, you know your stuff, so that you come to the table with value.
Thank you for that. The questions are rolling in now. Thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll have time to get through all of them. I'm just gonna pick a few. So here's a question. Some people are asking about how to move beyond just reposting activism on social media, and like just using it as like a platform to virtue signal, and like how do you do like real activism after you retweet?
Yeah, I think that's also a really good question. I'd say you have to research. I mean, there are so many NGOs, so many groups in South Africa that are working on incredible things. And we are so privileged to be in a country whereby almost everyone is trying to do something about the issue, which is really great. So I'd say research what are different organizations within the community that you stay in, or within your province, that are doing work that is in the field you're interested in, and contact them and engage with them. You could be a volunteer there, you could work there, you can be an assistant there, you can consult there. There's so many different things that you can do. Just off the top of my head, I know a group of 800 young people that during COVID have worked every single day to distribute food packages to those who don't have anything. That same group of 800 also works in clinics across Gauteng and the Northwest, doing COVID testing and HIV testing. Now, these are people that are your age and my age. How do we have more of those young people that are doing the work? If you want to do youth employment work within the space, you're welcome to contact me. If you want to do work about gender-based violence, the South African Institute of International Affairs is doing lots of work in that field. So there's so many different spaces. Just research and contact them, and don't be afraid to reach out. Volunteers and your interest is so valuable.
Thank you. Okay. So for the next one, can you briefly share a bit more about the transformation that you feel the NGO space needs?
This is my favorite question because I think people have a lot of misconceptions about the NGO space. Firstly, you don't get paid less when you're in an NGO. A lot of people think that. I used to work for Deloitte Consulting, and the past 2 jobs that I've had in NGOs are definitely much better paying than the previous job I had. People think you get paid less, but if you think about it, lots of your NGOs get funding from government or from the British or the Americans. So because of that, NGOs actually do really well, and it's quite a competitive space. The second thing is that I think there's actually, if you would all be interested, the Africa Matters podcast. The most recent episode speaks about the struggles of Black-owned NGOs. What you often find within the NGO space is that very often your leadership is white and then your middle management is Black. That is across the healthcare space, that is across the education space, across the youth employment space. What is more interesting about that is that Black-owned NGOs receive less funding than white-owned NGOs. In fact, there's a study in Kenya that proves that, either in Uganda or Kenya, Black-owned NGOs there would approach a white American to say, can you be on the board of my NGO so we can get funding? So I think that there's a lot of institutional racism within the NGO space that definitely has to be addressed. The other thing that is, I think, so interesting about the space is that because funding is so limited, there's constant competition for funding. So even though you're doing good work, there's so many players in the space that everyone wants to pitch for that funding, so there's not as much collaboration happening. So instead of seeing it one another as as accomplices rather to a cause, you see each other as competition. The last thing I'll share about transformation needed in the NGO space is that for as long as I can remember, every white man I have reported to, I have been smarter than him. And not just me thinking that I'm smarter. I have a master's degree. They've often just had their first degree. But because of the fact that I'm young and I'm Black and I'm a woman, I face more barriers. In fact, there's a friend of mine who is pursuing her PhD. And just yesterday, actually, at the NGO she works for, they refer to her as semi-skilled. But how are you semi-skilled if you are pursuing your PhD and if you've got work experience? So there's a lot of institutional racism within the NGO space. However, I do think it's changing, and it's changing because of our generation. Our generation is able to come into a space and talk about these issues. One of the best things for me about working at YES is that I report directly to Tash, who is a woman of color. And that was one of my conditions when I made the move to say, I want to report to a woman of color because I think I would thrive under that leadership. So I'm happy to talk to anyone else that's interested about NGOs and link you with other people in NGOs. In fact, I think most of my friends are either lawyers or NGOs or work in NGOs.
Okay, thank you so much. And just briefly, what was the podcast? What's the name of the podcast and that you were referring to, and where do you think we can find it?
It's called the Africa Matters podcast, and it's available on all podcast platforms.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. And finally, a last question. I think we'll choose with your experience studying overseas and the international speaking / collaborations, what would you say to young Africans who aspire to work or study overseas?
The first thing I'd say is that studying overseas or working overseas is so great to shape you, to shape the way you think, to get you to realize that actually this narrative that's painted of Africa as being this dark continent is not true. You get to see so much potential that our continent has. You get to acknowledge the beauty of our continent, and you get to also think, all right, what are other countries doing that we can then learn from? So I think that's the first highlight, that you learn so much. One of my favorite aspects about doing my master's abroad is that I made friends from Malaysia, from Pakistan, from Liberia, and especially it's interesting, those of us from countries considered to be the global south linked so much. And when we would talk, we would not just hang out as friends, but we'd start engaging on, all right, so what's the policy on gender-based violence in Mexico? All right, so this is what's happening in South Africa. What are the similarities between our countries? So I think that's beautiful, that you get to learn so much from each other. The one thing I will say is that even when you do go abroad, you have to come back to the continent and contribute. I don't think Africa needs another brain drain, particularly for those of us as young people who have so much potential, who can be so scholared. Head abroad, because there's so many opportunities. I've got a floating list that I share with anyone who emails me about opportunities to study abroad. Please contact me, I'll share it with you, but on condition that you come back and you contribute to building this incredible continent.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's brilliant. And if anyone wants to get in touch with you to get a hold of this floating list or ask you questions, maybe we'll post your details in the chat. Tiani, if you could get on that, that'd be terrific. Thank you
Yeah,
so
you're
much.
welcome to post the email address. That's perfect.
Cool, thank you. And that's all the time we have for you today. We're going to move on to our next speaker. Thank you so much for spending this time with us, and it's been really interesting and eye-opening, and I really appreciate engaging with us like this.
Cool, thank you so much.
Awesome. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Cool. So our next speaker is Caroline Petersen. She is a features and lifestyle journalist at Fair Lady magazine, one of the longest running and most popular South African women's magazines. She started her journey as a lifestyle blogger while in high school. When she began her journey at UCT, studying a Bachelor's of Arts in Multimedia Production, Media and Writing, and Film and Television Studies, she became the online features editor for Varsity Newspapers in 2018, as well as a social media director for her campus. She graduated with distinction in all three of her majors, and today she's expanded to work as a freelancer, opening herself up to more opportunities within and outside Media 24. Caroline, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. I actually have a glass of wine here to replicate what should have been our media conference. I know how this goes. Yeah, thanks so much. Cool. So, my name's Caroline, and I am a features and lifestyle writer at Fair Lady magazine. I'm actually a journalist. That's actually what I study to be, but it feels so weird saying that. I just sometimes feel like I'm just a writer writing about stuff I'm interested in with a team of other cool writers, and we just do our thing. But I work for Fair Lady magazine, and I'm more here just to speak about my journey coming out of university and into the media industry. So I started university in 2016, straight out of high school, and then did my triple major. Thanks so much for saying all that stuff, Brad. I think this has been my dream to be a journalist since I was 14. I wish I could show you some parts of my blog that has been long gone deleted, and clips of a YouTube channel, because obviously every one of us had a YouTube channel, and of me looking directly into the camera when I was 14 years old, being like, I want to work at 17 magazine. And I obviously didn't work at 17 magazine. I got the more grown up version, but I'm okay with that too. What kind of really focused my attention in terms of what I wanted to do and kind of beeline for it was actually getting involved in all the extracurricular activities that I possibly could that have to do with journalism. So that kind of helped me figure out what my niche was, what I enjoyed, and all that kind of stuff. So I joined Varsity Newspaper just as a casual writer in 2017 in my second year, and also was a part of the people who kind of got her campus UCT kind of off the ground. And then in 2018, which was my third year, I became the online features editor of Varsity Newspaper, and also the social media director of her campus UCT. So clearly 2018, my third year of university was incredibly busy. I remember going for an internship interview and telling them all that I did. And they were like, oh yeah, and you just do academics on the side. And I was like, yeah, just for fun, just on the side. But yeah, when I became the features editor, I think I actually had no clue what features even meant. But the more I looked into it, the more I actually realized that it was something that I had been doing since I was a teenager. So I took up a leadership position, and in Varsity Newspaper was kind of the place where, if I could summarize my experience there, I'm sure you guys would all relate to it. It was hard work. It was hard work. But it really taught me a lot about the media industry. Varsity Newspaper really was mimicking what the media industry is like outside university. It was a tight ship, and it taught me about leadership and about guiding others, but it also taught me to learn a lot from the people who were above me. At her campus UCT, I became obviously the social media director, and there I got to flesh out more of my creative side, and I kind of was really cool because I got to kind of take a brand from the ground and watch it grow. So it was an incredible opportunity, and I love my time at her campus UCT. I kind of ran the Instagram, and I ran a team of people who ran the social media, like the Facebook, the Twitter, and I got YouTube running. So yeah, that was quite cool. It was also quite a tight ship, and it taught me a lot about consistency there. So also while I was there, while I was leading a team, I was also under a team. So I worked also just as a casual writer and also as an editor. So clearly this dual dynamic of me being in a leadership position, but also wanting to continuously learn and work in a team was a real priority for me. So all of these things have led up to kind of having the job that I have today. So one of the things I've also been asked to speak about is the fact of what it's like to work in the magazine industry. Now, it's very glamorized. Everyone thinks that it's like the devil wears Prada. And I won't lie, kind of is like that. Yeah, so it is very glamorized. I like to say to a lot of people, it's almost the rosier side of journalism, if you can think about it like that. But it's what I love. That's what I love about it. But don't forget the fact that it's also hard work. Yeah, so what I love about it especially is that as opposed to hard news within the magazine industry, you get to work on a piece for a really long time compared to hard news. I get to work on something for about 2 weeks to a month even sometimes, and really put my all into it, and yeah, put a piece of myself into it. I'm a very emotive person. As you can see, I talk a lot with my hands, and I'm not good with being emotionless. So that's been a real benefit. Yeah, so I get to do a lot of that. I run a lot of social media. I get to attend really cool events, product launches, and that kind of stuff. In this kind of situation, mingling is really, it's a top skill that you need here also, being able to interact with people. But yeah, so also one thing to say is that with the magazine industry, I just went on a walk before this and I was chatting with one of my good friends. We were both studying the same thing, but she ended up going into like educational writing and I ended up going into journalism. And what she commented on my experience was pretty true. She was like, magazine industry is not for the faint-hearted, because as you guys know, there's constant up and downs. Print industry is on the decline. So get ready to understand what freelancing is when you get in, if you want to pursue the magazine industry. Just know that if you want it, you must really, really want it, because it's not for the faint-hearted. But yeah, so also just like varsity, the magazine industry is a tight ship. One of the biggest rules when I came into Fair Lady, one thing I was taught, never miss a deadline. Never miss a deadline. Because if I don't meet a deadline, that means my features editor can't edit my work, which means the subbers can't sub, which means the designers can't put it into a spread, and then eventually my editor-in-chief can't check over it and send it to print, which goes at a certain day. So
we know the struggle so well.
Exactly. So varsity really taught me that discipline and the importance of working, not just for myself, but with other people in mind. So I don't just work for myself. Obviously, I work for my readers and my audience, but I work with my team in mind. You work in a team constantly. Just also to speak about the struggles in coming out of varsity and then into the real world, as they say. I also will share a little bit about that now. First off, it's tough. It's tough because in varsity, you often university, not varsity newspaper, but university in general. You rely on yourself a lot of the time. You don't hand a paper in on time, 5% off, that's fine. You deal with it, you accept the consequences. Yeah, and if you struggle with something in varsity newspaper, for example, you have an editor who will constantly walk every step of the way with you. They'll go through, I know I used to do this, go through every single sentence with you, trying to fix tone, and that doesn't happen. That doesn't always happen in the real world. Sometimes it does. Some companies really promote it, and some people just honestly don't have the time to do it. So yeah, you have to learn to adapt and not, get upset that things aren't always the way it was, and you just adapt, you self-learn, you look at other people's work. you watch out for amendments. Most importantly, you look out for what senior people are doing and you ask them questions and you keep moving, you keep rolling. That's how you learn and that's how you grow. What's also tough about the real world is that mental illness. That's really difficult. It's tough because as a creative, you have to constantly create, right? You make your living, you get paid in a salary at the end of the month by being creative. So when your brain struggles to even get out of bed and go shower, it's really difficult to purple prose it all out there, you know? But yeah, that's another difficulty. It's really tough. We don't always have understanding course conveners in the real world. So, but somehow I am still here. I have a long list of things, but I'm still here and I've somehow made it through it all. It's just sometimes you just have to work extra hard and you need a support system. But I'm proof that you can do it. And that not everything your brain tells you is accurate and the truth. You do deserve to make it and go far. I'm no ways in terms of far, but you can do it. And so, yeah, that's another challenge that I've interacted with. I speak a lot about mental illness on my social media. So if you guys want to follow me there and have more chats about it, I'll pop my Insta in the chat after this. But yeah, and then also another difficulty that's rolled around now is obviously lockdown. I'm sure you guys have all heard the news about magazine closures. So we all knew that print was on the decline already, but due to COVID-19, that we've reached that point exponentially faster. So the trouble with many print industries is lack of advertising and then also lack of audience, of course. But because people have obviously increased access to really great resources online, print is slowly disappearing. And it's really sad, but of course it's more sad for the people who are talented journalists who have lost their jobs. We've seen the shutdown of magazines at Associated Media, at Caxton, and of course Media 24. I almost thought I'd have to pull out of this conference because I was like, oh, I don't have a job, guys. Why do you want me to speak here? Yeah, no, it's really sad, but I'm quite relieved that Fair Lady is still around. We are still publishing, and yeah, we just have had to make amendments and we keep rolling and we keep doing our thing. I'm incredibly proud of the Fair Lady team because we've managed to create a number of issues being completely isolated from each other since March. Actually, before lockdown, we left the office. So we've managed to keep rolling, and we've also done a lot of virtual events now, which have become really popular. So we adapt and we keep rolling. Yeah. So what really helps is that our brand is such a familiar brand, and we have such a niche, and we're committed to our audience, and our audience is committed to us. We stick to what we know, and we stick to our brand, and it really wins in terms of that. So yeah. So what I just want to end with is just some tips that I've also spoken about at other conferences and workshops about kind of the top tips that I kind of recommend for like how to be paid one day out of university, because let's be honest, that's all kind of what we want to do one day. We want to use our skills and our passions and eventually get paid. And this doesn't apply to everyone, doesn't apply to everything, but this is what I found has at least gotten me a step or two forward. So yeah, so while you're in university, first off, if you can, be willing to work for free. Now, this is something that I actually learned at another Varsity Media conference, and someone said this. So personally, I don't agree with unpaid labor, but if you can, try do things like internships, get involved in societies, in media stuff, just get your name out there, just get experience working with a team, and just be willing to work for free. Be able to say like, I just want this for my CV, like you don't necessarily need to pay me. And yeah, like it shows that you're willing to work and to work hard, not necessarily for the money, but because you're passionate. So while you can, and if you can, especially during university, try to be willing to work for free. Yeah. Secondly, of course, do internships. That looks really great on your CV. yeah, that also gives you the taste of the real world and seeing what like an office dynamic looks like and how deadlines actually work. Ooh, sorry, my parents sneezed in the background. I hope you didn't hear that. But yeah, do internships. I started with, I did an internship at Hubble Studios, which was they approached UCT, so always be on the lookout for that. They were looking for interns. I applied and luckily got in. And then actually while I was doing my internship at Hubble Studios, I met another intern who said they did an internship at Fair Lady. I was like, oh, cool. Give me their contact. Sorry, my mom sneezing in the background. And then I got that contact, and then I just kind of emailed someone and said, hey, like, I want to be an intern. I'm willing to be an intern for you guys. And that's how I got my internship at Fair Lady, and that's how I kind of started working my way up. I genuinely just wanted to work for free for the experience, and then started off as an intern, worked my way up to a freelancer, and then they just kept asking me to come back. So I luckily, I'm very fortunate, very lucky to be able to keep working there. And that's how you form relationships. Sometimes, like they say, it's not about what you know, which is very important, but it's also about who you know. So get out there, do internships. Third thing is that your attitude to work is sometimes more important than like how you work. So if you walk into the office every day and you can just be really keen and really excited to do anything. So the last time they told me I had to do Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and I'm a very namaste, yoga on the mat type of girl. And they were like, can you do jiu-jitsu for us? And I was like, sure, cool, let's do it. Right, I injured myself in it, but I just made for a good article, right? So be willing and be able to just have like a great attitude to work. Often when it comes down to it, sometimes in terms of people deciding who stays, who goes, they want to know that you can work well in a team. So that's really important, is that, I hate to put it this way, but if you don't bitch and moan all the time, and if you just have a really great attitude towards working and being a part of a team, that's really great. And it makes people want to work with you. So that's really great. And then last but not least, be able to take criticism. We're all young journalists, and we all have an opportunity to learn so much from others. There are so many people. I mean, our last two speakers, I'm just like heart eyes, absolutely in awe of them. And it comes to a point where like you're in a situation and someone tells you like, listen here, sometimes I've had to scrap whole entire articles that I've worked on for a month because I just didn't get the tone right. I'm a 23-year-old woman who's writing for 40 to 60-year-old women, and I'm not always going to get it right. So being willing to say, thank you, actually, thank you so much. You know, I'm actually going to take that and I'm going to rework it. And then like, let's see how it comes out. Apparently that's been like a big thumbs up for me as a young writer who's trying to make it into the industry, is be willing to take criticism. One of the biggest things I found being in a leadership position at UCT, in both her campus UCT and Varsity newspaper, something I learned there, and something I was also told from people I work with, is that people don't know how to take criticism at all. And I experienced that too. Genuinely, if you see it as other people trying to help you and to develop you and to grow you, and you just change your perspective on that, it like makes a mile of difference. It honestly is just something to help you grow, rather than seeing it as something's personal offense. And that's what I struggled with being in a leadership position, is trying to work with people who can't understand that. So yeah, it's that's kind of the 4 tips that I'd kind of say was something that really helped me in transitioning out of university and into the workplace. So yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I thought that was really useful. I appreciated that. I'm sure a lot of us on the panel did as well. So we do have a few questions. I also just want to take this time to let everyone know that they can still submit their questions through on the Q&A tab. Some of them you have answered, but there's one that you haven't. How do you work through writer's block on those days where your mental health isn't at its greatest?
Oh, oh goodness. To be honest, I probably just lie in bed for the first couple of days, because let's be real, we're all human. But honestly, so something that I actually learned, very interesting enough, I'm writing a piece currently about mental illness misconceptions and then analyzing it through film. And it's going to be one of the pieces that I'm writing for the September edition of Fair Lady. And I got to interview a psychologist, and we were chatting about multiple mental illnesses, schizophrenia, bipolar, OCD, but we spoke about depression, for example. So one of the things that happens with depression, just a fun fact, is that there's this thing called anhedonia, which means, I'm sure you guys, if you have depression, experienced it, that the things that you love, the things that you find joy for, just are gone. They disappeared. So if you love writing and if you love your job, you all of a sudden hate it. You want to quit your job. You know what? You want to lie in bed. You have writer's block. Nothing works. So I would say what actually psychologists recommended is that with people with depression, people with mental illness, we don't have the luxury of motivation coming to us. We often have to work really, really hard and work extra hard to go find that motivation. So often you have to trigger that yourself. So luckily I have an incredible fiance, he's sitting over there, who drags me out of bed and sometimes makes me go for a walk. And often he reminds me, but anyone can really do this for you, whether it's yourself or someone else. Remind you of the things that you love and start actively trying to do that again. Force yourself to do it. Do tiny little bits of it. For example, you use the example of if you're a swimmer and you normally swam 10 lengths, you don't even need to do that. Just get into the pool. Just dip into the pool and then see if you can try doing that again. One thing I also really love is to write good shit. You got to write shit. You have to be able to write shitty. So literally just pouring yourself onto a page, it's really bad. It's not complete sentences at all. That's how I have to, I hate it. I'm such a perfectionist, but just write horrible stuff just as a start. And then slowly when things start coming back to you, when you get hit with creativity again, slowly start adapting it again. Yeah, that's kind of how I try to get through it.
Thank you. I think that was extremely useful. I want to just take a few moments to let anyone else ask questions if they need, because there aren't any more on the Q&A tab. But if that is everything, no? Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much, Caroline. This has been really eye-opening and very, oh, there's another one. Okay, wait, hang on. Have you ever interviewed a difficult person?
All the time. All the time. There are
How
times
do you
I've
deal
gone
with
to
that?
interviews and I've just gone to Matt, my fiance, and I've just been like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. This was shit. Do you mean, I don't know, Brad, if you want to help me clarify, do you mean difficult as in like they were fighting back at me or like they were just really boring?
Well, I think you could answer the question both ways. What would you do in like a hostile interview? Like, what's the protocol? And secondly, what if there's literally just like no information that you can tap from this person?
So if they were more difficult, I don't know. I've never actually interviewed someone who's been really, really difficult. I've had people, for example, I'll just share like these fun stories because I know they're really amusing. I interview someone, so how I do it, I record on my phone, then I transcribe, which honestly takes the most amount of time in my writing process. I have my transcript, I literally transcribe everything, not only the important bits, which is something also a big note. And then I highlight the good stuff and then I pop it into like an article that I write. And someone said something like, I don't know what it was. They said something like, oh, just at the drop of a hat. Let's say, for example, they said, the drop of the hat, then the business started. And so I was like, ooh, at a drop of the hat, the business started. And then they were like, they copied back to them and I was like, hey, can you check through, just finalize if there are any factual errors, let me know, do I need to change? They were like, I didn't say at a drop of a hat. I was like, oh, you did. Actually, I have the transcription of it. You did say it. And they were like, no, a drop of the hat is not even an expression that even exists. And I was like, oh, it does. I always play it really nice. So just as a word for people who are difficult, always keep your transcriptions. Always keep the audio, keep your evidence, keep your receipts, guys, keep your receipts. And then in terms of if someone is really boring, it happens a lot. Sometimes you interview people, what happens a lot of time if there's two people, they rely on each other to answer the questions, which means that like you end up go away from it and no one's answered any questions because they kept on relying on each other. I often try to get really specific, always try to poke their buttons. I know I don't do that approach, but try like poke them a bit, ask them very personal questions like, what do your parents think of that? And then try to get them to say something. But often what happens is that you come away from an interview and you look at the transcript and you never actually realized how not headline worthy it is. And then you often have to do things like revert, if it was a Q&A, for example, which relies a lot on like a chunk of their text, like maybe change it to prose, and then kind of you write the magic into their words. You kind of pick up on their vibe and their aura and their feel, and then you make the magic for them. So yeah, it's happened, but yeah, you still got to send to print. So I often just will have to edit and write the magic for them and kind of, yeah, and then they poured me a glass of gin and they were so welcoming, and that translates into their business, and that's how they, so yeah, you have to do the magic for them.
Speaking of doing the magic for them, I assume that you have to walk like quite a fine line between I don't know, breathing life into a piece and actually sensationalizing it. I don't know what the process is there, but have you what are your experiences with sensationalism like within the business?
Luckily with lifestyle, especially working at a magazine, if you see something like 5 ways to lose fat fast, most likely we're going to give you 5 ways. We don't work on a clickbait structure where you're gonna like we get clicks. We genuinely do deliver on that. What I love about print media is that we're super old school. I really do love it. So I've never really had to sensationalize anything. Yeah, it's a really awesome industry to work in, and the people that we meet and the women that I get to interview are just chef's kiss. Normally they are sensational in and of itself. They really don't need that much sensationalization. And yeah, print, especially the magazine that I work with, we're incredible and we have really great standards, and I've learned so much from the women above me that yeah, like I've never really needed to.
Oh, well, that's great. Okay, cool. So I have 2 last questions.
Sure.
Actually 3. Okay, so quickly, what advice do you have for someone who's trying to balance their work and personal life?
Oh, that is difficult. To balance, especially during university, was super difficult. I really struggled with that. Balancing that. I always often either went too much into my personal life or went too much into my academics and all of that. I'd say you need to have really clear boundaries. People hate boundaries, but that's a sign that your boundaries are working. So have really strict boundaries with it, and don't compromise on that kind of stuff. If you don't work on Sundays, you don't work on Sundays, and so be it. The world will continue turning, like it will, without you. So people must make plans, and if they have boundaries, you have boundaries. In terms of personal life, I've had to make, what's really awesome about the industry that I'm in is that the fact that I have a personal life is really good. So it blends really well into what I do. That's why I love lifestyles, because I have a life. Why it works so well is because it's so personal. So as soon as I started at Fair Lady, I was like, hey, by the way, I'm a kids yoga instructor and I love yoga, and I love exercise, and I love all things nutrition. I think that's really interesting and I'm really interested in it. They're like, cool, you're our workout girl now. So now every time there's any opportunity to do this new workout, like kickboxing, hot yoga, jiu-jitsu, anything like that. I'm the one who does it. So I think it's really great that you actually do have a life, and I think that can blend really well into your writing and into what you write about. Often sometimes I'm like, hey, I actually just met someone who is a blind ballerina dancer. I'm joking, I haven't met someone like that, but I know someone of that. So, and that's a story. So I think it's really great that you should have strong both of those so that they can work well together.
Okay, cool. So we are running a bit over time, so I'm only going to take one more question. How does the magazine's values align with yours in terms of their understanding of the term woman?
It's really difficult. It's really different because I'm writing for women who are in their 40s and 60s. Essentially, I as a 23-year-old woman, I'm writing for people who are like my mom's age. And often I'm sure you guys will find even that you guys disagree with your parents all the time. Their views don't necessarily agree with your views. But the thing is, we're still living in the same world. So I find, I haven't actually, I've surprisingly found, like, there's some things that I'm like, I wouldn't necessarily have made that decision. But they have been really awesome when it comes to picking up new stories, when it comes to like the world and social dynamics and political views. I actually was going to write this one story that they approved of like, I forgot the word again, but it's like a trans identity of when you're a person of color who's adopted by like a white family and the dynamics of that. I've written a piece now on mental illness, which is like not something that I really saw in the magazine before, but I brought that in. We had my colleague wrote a piece about transgender athletes. I think what's really awesome is that like we have gone in there and been like, hey, like how does feminism look for men, for example? And they're super open to it. As much as I'm learning, they're also learning. And yeah, it's interesting. It's very traditional, that I will say. But yeah, I've quite enjoyed the experience. What I quite like, what's important is that my work is not my life. So I write for them, but I also am my own identity. So I have my own Twitter, I have my own Instagram, and I can engage. And as a freelance, I can write for more people if I want to. And write about what I love for Fair Lady, and also write about what I love for other people. And yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think that was quite insightful.
Cool.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have, but this has been it's been really nice engaging with you, and like it's been very useful. And yeah, thank you so much for taking time out of your Friday evening.
Sure, no worries. Thanks so much, Brad. Thanks for asking newspaper.
No worries. Thank you so much. So everyone, I just want to take this opportunity to thank everyone, all the panelists who've talked today and everyone else for coming. If you'd like to further engage with the speakers and you can keep up with their work, you can follow them on their Instagram handles, which I'm posting in the chat. And follow Varsity News too, if you don't already, at Varsity News, to tune into day 2 of the conference on our Instagram Live. It'll feature interviews from the producer of Politically Aware, Stephen Horn, YouTube and digital content creator Luandile Makaza, and her campus chairperson and CNSCS, pronounced conscious, co-creator Stella Hertanyato. So yeah, thank you everyone for coming. It's been really productive, lovely engaging with you all, and I hope to see you tomorrow. Cheers.